for example, sample mean, sample variance, median, or some other characteristic to draw certain inference on the population. So the basic problem of statistical inference is the basic problem of statistics is to draw some inferences on a statistical population. So when we say inferences, what are the kind of inferences that are possible? So one thing could be, as I mentioned, we get a value for something. So I said that we want to find out what is the estimated mortality rate, what is the estimated growth of economy, what is the expected. So I am using the word expected. So that means what do we expect something to happen. So this is called the problem of estimation. So there are following types of inferences that are usually done. One, point estimation. So in the point estimation, we assign a value to a prospective population parameter. For example, so these are some of the examples where the point estimation is done. Okay, so you assign a value. For example, what is the expected longevity of people in India? So it is some 68.4 years. What is the expected longevity of people in Japan? So it is some 86 years or something like that. So that we assign a value. For example, what is the variability in the exchange rate? So for example, in India, it is something like say around 4 rupees kind of thing. So this is called the problem of point estimation. So in this, we assign a statistic, say T of x1, x2, xn for a parameter g theta. So in general, like you said, that we have a normal population with parameter mu and sigma square. We have a Poisson population with parameter lambda. We have a gamma distribution with parameters r and lambda. So every distribution is specified certain parameters. So when we say we want to estimate the mean, so for example, in the normal distribution, the mean is mu. In the gamma distribution, the mean is r by lambda. In a beta distribution, the mean is alpha by alpha plus beta. So similarly, for every distribution, the mean, variance, the median, the range. So in the distribution theory, we have seen the expressions for those things. We would like to estimate them on the basis of a random sample x1, x2, xn, which is taken from that population. So we will construct a statistics. So for example, if I want to estimate the average say income, then I may consider say median of the incomes for the sample that we have considered. If we are considering say average crop production of say wheat in Punjab, then we may like to take a random sample and then take the sample mean. If I am considering the say variability, then I may like to consider the standard deviation taken from the sample. So in general, we are assigning a statistic T of x1, x2, xn for a parameter g theta. Okay. So now, how do we do that thing? So for that, we have certain criteria, because you may say that I can use anything. Like if I say I want to estimate the expected average income, then I may say I can take sample median, I can take sample mean, I can take say geometric mean or anything, because different people may have different perception about the functions there. That means which T of x1, x2, xn I will take. Therefore, one needs to assign certain criteria that which one will be better in a certain situation. For example, if I say that for estimating expected income, I will use sample mean, and another person says I will use sample median. Then what is the criteria through which we can say that this one is better? Then we look at that what gives a better information in a given situation. So for example, if you consider sample mean for the incomes, then what happens that in a population, in any given population, large number of people have income levels at a certain point. So for example, in India, if you look at a majority of people, say 80% of the people, they earn something like 10,000 rupees or less than that per month. Whereas there are certain set of people, say 0.1% of the set of the people, but whose income is maybe in billions. Now, if you take a direct average of these values, then it is highly inflated, because the value which is in billions and you add with the values which are less than 10,000, then the total number becomes very large. So it will give a false sense of expected income. In this case, if we take a median income, it gives a better interpretation. Similarly, if I am considering say expected longevity, that means what is the average life of a person in a particular country or in a particular state, and if I take a direct median, direct mean, then it does not reflect the true value, because in any given population, if you see, there will be a lot of people who get very high age. For example, there will be people who are above 90 years and so on. But then there are large number of people who are having low age. Now, if you take a direct average, then it cancels out each other and you get something like a middle value. But if you take the median value, that gives a better reflection. Similarly, if I am considering, say, average velocity of a while traveling between, say, two cities or something, then you see that when the vehicle is traveling on the road, then there are stretches when it can go very fast, say maybe at a speed of 80 kilometers or 90 kilometers per hour. But then there will be stretches where it can go only, say, 20 kilometers per hour or say 30 kilometers per hour. So which, if you take a direct average, it will not give a reflection. If you take a harmonic mean, it will be a better representation of the expectation. So therefore, when we consider the point estimation, we look at the usage, that means how it is reflecting the true values. So the first thing that we have, it is called criteria for estimation. Okay. The first criteria is called unbiasedness. Okay. So a statistic Tx is said to be an unbiased estimator for the parametric function g theta if expectation of Tx is equal to g theta. So if expectation of Tx is equal to, say, g theta plus b theta, we say that T is a biased estimator of g theta with bias b theta. So let us start with some examples to illustrate this. So let x1, x2, xn be a random sample from, say, Poisson lambda distribution. Okay. Let us take, say, Tx to be the mean of these observations. Okay. 1 by n sigma xi. Then what is expectation of Tx? By the linearity property of expectation, this is 1 by n sigma expectation of xi. So that is equal to 1 by n. In Poisson distribution, the mean is lambda, so it becomes lambda. So here you can see that the sample mean x bar is unbiased estimator of the population mean lambda. So x bar is unbiased for estimating lambda. Now let us check whether it is a general type of thing that sample mean will be unbiased for population mean. The answer is actually yes. provided the population mean exists. So if population mean mu exists, then the sample mean x bar is unbiased for mean. Okay, of course the proof is almost trivial because expectation of x bar is nothing but expectation of 1 by n sigma xi, that is 1 by n sigma expectation of xi. Expectation xi is mu, so it is 1 by n mu, that is mu. So if the population mean exists, then we can always use sample mean as an unbiased estimator for the population mean. Okay. What is the meaning of unbiasedness? So unbiasedness means that it does not discriminate between the values. As I mentioned to you, I was telling about, say, large values as estimate and small values. So it does not discriminate. Say, for example, high income, low income, high age, low age, then it does not discriminate. So then that is known as unbiased estimator. However, this is only one of the properties. Let us look at some other properties also. So as a layman, if you see, suppose you go to market and you ask a supermarket person that what is your average income per day. So he will, what he will do, he will take a sample and then he will tell from there. Or if you ask him monthly that per month what is the income, so he will take a sample of sales of certain number of people and from there he will estimate that thing. So this is something which is like a layman's thing, but it is having a sound statistical background, that why we are using sample mean as an unbiased estimator of the population mean. In fact, similarly we can also prove for the sample variance also, because that is also unbiased for the population variance. Let me just mention that part also here, because in many cases that is directly used here. So let me just give it. If population variance sigma square exists, then the sample variance S square, that is S square is defined by 1 by n minus 1 sigma xi minus x bar square is an unbiased estimator of sigma square. So sample variance is unbiased for the population variance. So these are some of the standard results, and of course the proofs are almost trivial. You have to just write down this linearity of the expectation. Let me move to the next one, next important property. So what is the next important property? What do you feel? So for example, if I am considering an estimate for certain parameter, so I take a sample of size say 15 and I get an estimate. Suppose I take a sample of size 40, then I estimate. If I take a sample of size 100 and then I estimate using the same function, for example, it could be sample mean. Then what is your expectation? What do you feel that should happen? An estimate based on say a sample of size 15, an estimate based on a sample of size say 40, and an estimate based on a sample of size 100. Which one would be preferable? Can anybody answer this question?
Sir, estimation based on size sample 101, the larger
Based
sample.
on the larger sample. So what is the reason that based on the larger sample it should be preferred? So what is the logic that you give for larger sample?
So like the larger the sample we consider, like so the more it will be close to the population, like more we can have the variety, like the more larger the sample is we have, the more the variety of population we can cover in that sample. More
So if you cover
characteristics of
more variety,
population.
what will happen? If you cover more variety, what will happen?
So that it will reflect the most of the properties of the population in it. Like all the characteristics
So
of the population that
in
we have can be
numerical
covered in
terms,
the sample.
what does it mean? In numerical terms, what it will mean if it represents more the population. So what numerically it will mean? What it will mean numerically? Anybody? If I have an estimator based on larger data set or larger sample, what do we expect it to be?
So the mean will be more accurate. So the mean.
So the variance will be less.
So if the variance will be less, so what does it mean? It means that we are coming closer to the right value. As you said that we are representing more values properly. So that means the value that you use by the estimator, it will be closer to the true value of the parameter. So that is what it is. So that means in general, we also, apart from unbiasedness, we also expect a property which should have, which is having a desirable property, that as soon as you increase the size of the sample, it should come closer to the true parameter value. This property is called consistency. Okay, so second property that we are having, consistent estimator. So you are writing down an estimator based on n observation, an estimator t is equal to t of x1, x2, xn is said to be consistent for estimating g theta if for every epsilon greater than 0, probability that Tn minus g theta is greater than epsilon, this goes to 0 as n tends to infinity. That means the difference between the estimated value and the true value becomes less and less, because the probability for whatever epsilon I choose, the probability that the difference is greater than epsilon, it goes to 0. That means the probability that mod of Tn minus g theta is less than epsilon, that goes to 1. You can write it in the reverse way also, that is the probability of modulus Tn minus g theta less than epsilon, that goes to 1. So this is called consistency. So some of you may be interested in the game of cricket or say tennis or anything. So for example, when do you say a batsman, say for example, say Rahul Dravid, so you make a statement regarding Rahul Dravid's performance. So what do you say? He is having a consistent performance because he scores certain number of runs given a time. So over a large period of time, you see, you look at the average of the batsman or the average of the bowler or the average economy rate, etc. over a long period of time. isn't it? And then you say that this player is good, okay, because you see his performance over a period of time. So you say it is true reflection of its true value. So for example, when we write down a recommendation letter for the students when they are applying for some job or for some fellowship abroad, then we have to say the student has been, I mean, there is a column there where we have to say the consistency of the performance. So we say that, okay, the student has a consistent performance throughout his, say, study at IIT Kharagpur. So we give that kind of a statement. So what does it mean? It means that over a long run, the CGPA reflects your true potential. It is not that you are a very good student but you still get a 6 CGPA, or you are a bad student and you will get a 9 CGPA. Over a period of 8 semesters or 10 semesters, your average CGPA will reflect your true performance or true potential. Okay, so is this statement clear? Is this concept clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so so consistency is another property, and again actually we have very less time, so I will just mention these things here. So say for example, let me take x1, x2, xn, a random sample, say from uniform distribution on the parameter space 0 to theta, okay, and we want a consistent estimator for theta. Let us take, say, t to be maximum of x1, x2, xn. If you remember in order statistics section, I have introduced this thing there. So let us look at what is the consistency of this maximum of the observations. Okay, so let us consider, say, a probability of xn minus theta greater than epsilon. Now in the uniform distribution on the interval 0 to theta, all the observations will lie between 0 to theta. So xn will be less than theta. So it is nothing but probability theta minus xn greater than epsilon, which we can write as probability that xn is less than theta minus epsilon. If you remember the distribution of the maximum that we had derived, if maximum is less than theta minus epsilon, that means each of them is less than theta minus epsilon, and then using the independence we can just consider, so it becomes theta minus epsilon to the power n. Now epsilon is a positive number, so theta minus epsilon is less than theta, so this goes to 0 as n tends to infinity. So here xn is a consistent estimator of theta. So here you see this uniform distribution is distributed on the interval 0 to theta. So theta is the upper bound, and in order to estimate it consistently, we may use the largest observation that is there. So for example, if you say I want to estimate the time up to which the student joined the class, okay, so whether it is 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something like that, so we assign that. So we will take the consistently the time of the last student who joined, or we can look at the other way around also. That means when the students leave the class, then the student who leaves the last, I take his time, that when, so I want to estimate how much time the students take to leave the class. Okay. Once again, we will also look at the popular ones. The popular ones are the sample mean and the variance and the median, etc. So in general, actually we have a statement that, so I'll state it as a theorem here. Let expectation of t be equal to theta n, and so I'm putting some n here because it is based on the sample of size n, and variance of Tn is, say, sigma n square. let theta n converge to theta and sigma n square goes to 0, then, so I put Tn here just to denote that it is based on an observation. So we can say then Tn is a consistent estimator of theta. What does it mean? That in the long run, the estimator is unbiased. That means expectation of Tn is theta n, but theta n converges to theta. That means if the sample size increases, the estimator becomes almost unbiased and the variability becomes less and less. The variance of Tn goes to 0. So this point some of you were mentioning when I was asking the question that what do we expect when the sample size increases. So when the sample size increases, we expect the estimator to be, the expected value of the estimator to be closer to the true value and the variability should become less. So of course the proof of this is very simple. I will not be writing it here. Then in general we are having that if the population mean exists, then is a consistent estimator of the population mean. Second is that if Tn is consistent for theta, then say, let me put it as Sn. Sn is say An Tn plus Bn is also consistent for theta if An goes to 1 and Bn goes to 0. So consistency is a large sample property, therefore it has certain flexibility unlike the unbiasedness. Next we come to the methods of estimation. So actually there are many more properties of the estimators, but I will not be looking at all of them here because we have less amount of time left for this particular course. So other properties I'll just mention. Efficiency. So what is efficiency? That let T1 and T2 be two estimators of g theta. Okay. We define the expected mean squared error. Okay. Mean squared error. So MSE of T1 as expectation of T1 minus g theta square and mean squared error of T2 as expectation of T2 minus g theta square. So if mean squared error of T1 is less than or equal to mean squared error of T2 for all theta, we say that T1 is more efficient than T2. So this is again a very natural property. Why we are saying that we should use T1 compared to T2 is because if you take more and more observations, the variability of T1 is less compared to the variability of T2. So variability is an important criteria that we consider. So of course, apart from unbiasedness and consistency, we can also check this property here. Next we come to the methods of estimation. So the first one, of course, which is historical also, it is called least squares estimation. Actually, this is started from early 18th century itself, when Carl Friedrich Gauss, one of the most important mathematicians, he was given the task of estimating certain planetary movements. So they were checking the path of the thing, and they were basically checking the elliptical path. So how the different type of planets are moving around the sun. Now they had certain planetary observations based on the telescope. So from the telescope they used to take certain observations, and then they have to use it for estimating the true distances. So what Gauss did, he considered he fitted a model actually, and he fitted a model. In that model you have to consider the estimated value and the true value, and you take the difference. Now the values which will minimize that sum of squares of that differences, that is called the least square estimation. So later on it turned out to be a full-fledged method, and when we are considering the predictive models, there it is widely used. So I will not discuss much on this here, because in the next course that you will be doing, the regression and time series analysis, there you will be learning about this method, how to determine the curves there. So for example, a line, a parabola, or a cubic, or a log model, or an exponential model, etc. So let us take up the other things. The other popular methods is method of moments estimation, maximum likelihood estimation, so this is of course attributed to Gauss. Okay, this is attributed to Karl Pearson around the year 1900, and this is attributed to R.A. Fisher. Some of these names I had mentioned in my first lecture. They are basically Pearson and Fisher, etc. They are founders of the subject of statistics as it is taught today. So let us take, say, this method first, method of moments. Okay, method of moments is you can say a layman's understanding of the topic. So for example, I already mentioned to you, a sample mean is an unbiased estimator of the population mean. A sample mean is a consistent estimator of the population mean. A sample variance is unbiased for the population variance, etc. So what it means? It means that a parameter of a population, if I am using a same name for that in the sample, so population mean, sample mean, population variance, sample variance. So if I use these as the estimators, this is known as the method of moments. So formally this can be expressed like this. Let us consider, say, let x1, x2, xn be a random sample from a population. So we'll name the population, say p theta is the notation I am using. So theta is say theta 1, theta 2, theta k. Different populations have different number of parameters. So for example, a binomial distribution has 2 parameters, n and p. A Poisson distribution has 1 parameter. A Weibull distribution has 2 parameters, and so on. You can have 2, 3, 4 depending upon the kind of distribution that you are having. Okay. So we want to estimate theta 1, theta 2, theta k. Okay. So let us consider, say, expectation of, that is the first moment. Okay. What is the first moment? Mu1 prime. So it will be some function of the parameters. For example, in a binomial distribution, the mean is np. The variance is npq square and so on. npq, then third moment and so on. So what we do, if I have k parameters, I write down first k population moments. Okay. Mu k prime is equal to gk of theta 1, theta 2, theta k. So from here, let us suppose the system 1 has solution we write theta 1 is equal to say h1 of mu1 prime, mu2 prime, mu k prime, and so on. Theta k is equal to hk of mu1 prime, mu2 prime, mu k prime. Okay. So we define the rth sample moment as 1 by n sigma xi to the power r. Okay. R is equal to 1 to k. So in method of moments estimation, we estimate population moment mu1 prime, mu2 prime, mu k prime by corresponding sample moments alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha k. So method of moments estimators we call it MMEs, okay, of theta 1, theta 2, theta k are theta 1 head is equal to h1 of alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha k. That means in place of mu1 prime, mu2 prime, I substitute alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha k. So this method is a very straightforward method based on a basic understanding of the subject. That means for population moments, we use the corresponding sample moments to get the estimator. So as I mentioned to you that usually if you go to you consider any layman person who does not know any statistics, but even if you use the terminology like estimate, he will use this kind of estimate. However, this has certain fundamental scientific principle. First thing is that if this inverse functions h1, h2, hk, etc., they are continuous functions, then these are consistent estimators. So if functions h1, h2, hk are continuous functions, then theta I head is consistent estimator of theta I is equal to 1 to k. So that way, statistically, this is a sound principle. It is layman's principle, but still it is okay. Suppose I consider say x1, x2, xn, a random sample from normal mu sigma square. Okay. So if you consider a random sample from mu sigma square, so there are two parameters. So I will write two moments. Okay. What is mu1 prime in a normal distribution? It is mu. What is mu2 prime in normal distribution? It is mu square plus sigma square. So from here you simplify. So mu is mu1 prime and sigma square is equal to mu2 prime minus mu1 prime square. So method of moment estimators of mu and sigma square are mu head, that will give you alpha 1, that is x bar, and for sigma, so cap notation I am using for estimator. Mu2 prime, that is alpha 2 minus alpha 1 square, that is 1 by n sigma xi square minus x bar square, which is 1 by n sigma xi minus x bar square. So these are the method of moments estimator for mu and sigma square respectively here. Let me take another example. Say x1, x2, xn is a random sample from a gamma distribution with parameters say r and lambda. So two parameters are there. What is the mean of a gamma distribution? R by lambda. What is the second moment? If you remember, it is r by lambda minus r square by lambda square. R by lambda square plus r square by lambda square. So if you simplify this, you will get r is equal to, so anyway, I mean this is very simple. You have to just solve the two equations. So you get r is equal to mu1 prime square divided by mu2 prime minus mu1 prime square, and lambda is equal to mu1 prime divided by mu2 prime minus mu1 prime square. So you substitute alpha 1 for mu1 prime and mu2 prime, you put alpha 2, so you get the method of moments estimators of r and lambda. They are r head is equal to x bar square, and this term is 1 by n sigma xi minus x bar square, and lambda head is equal to x bar divided by 1 by n sigma xi minus x bar square. So like that you can calculate for other distributions also. Well, for quite some time that this method of estimation was used. However, in many of the problems it did not look very natural. For example, lambda head is x bar, the ratio of the sample mean and the variance here, and similarly for r you are getting the ratio of the two terms. So it did not look natural. In fact, if the sample observations are closer, then this value will get inflated. So to see this, then some other people had objections to this, and therefore later on a more important method, or you can say more effective method of estimation was developed. That is called the method of maximum likelihood estimator. So let x1, x2, xn be a random sample from a population with PMF or PDF fx theta, okay, where theta is say theta 1, theta 2, theta k. We define the likelihood function L theta x as the joint distribution of x1, x2, xn. Okay, either it is probability mass function or the density function. Of course, I am not considering the possibility of the mixed thing here, because if you consider that, then it will become more complicated. So it is written directly as the product of the distributions of x1, x2, xn, the joint distribution. Okay, this we call likelihood function. Okay, then the maximum likelihood estimators of theta, okay, that is equal to theta 1, theta 2, theta k, is theta head x2, xn, which maximizes L theta, that is L theta head x is the maximum of L theta x, where theta varies over the full parameter space. Okay, so over the parameter space, if we maximize the joint probability density function of the random variables are the observations, then that gives us the maximum likelihood estimator. So let me start with some example. This principle has certain solid explanation here. So let me start with some examples. Okay. Let us consider, say, x1, x2, xn following uniform 0 theta. Okay. We want maximum likelihood estimator of theta. So consider the likelihood function. So what is the density function in this case? You know the uniform distribution. It is 1 by theta, 0 less than x less than theta. It is equal to 0 otherwise. So the likelihood function is L theta x. So the density is 1 by theta. So n times you will write it is equal to 1 by theta to the power n, and you are saying 0 less than xi less than theta. It is 0 otherwise. Okay. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Is that clear? This is step of
Yes, sir.
writing down the likelihood function. Is that okay? Can you follow this step, the likelihood function?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
So can you follow this likelihood function?
Yes, sir.
So now the question is, we want to maximize this. So when this will be maximum? See, this is 1 by theta to the power n. So it will be maximum with respect to theta if theta is minimum, because it is coming in the denominator. So what is the minimum value of theta that is possible? So here you see, we can write it like this also: 1 by theta to the power n, 0 less than x1 less than x2 less than xn less than theta. I am using the order statistic here. So the minimum value of theta that is possible is xn only. You cannot go below xn because all the observations are less, and they are lying between 0 and theta. So this is maximized when theta is equal to xn. So the maximum likelihood estimator of theta is the maximum of the observations. Actually, I showed it to be a consistent estimator, so it has turned out nicely here that it is actually the maximum likelihood estimator. Now, in many practical problems, for example, if you consider, say, Poisson distribution, or you consider the normal distribution, when you write down the joint density, it is product of certain terms there. Okay. So when you consider this minimization maximization problem, sometimes it may be easier to deal with the log of the likelihood function. Okay. So I'll mention this comment here. So this is called log likelihood function. So I use the notation capital L for likelihood function. So log likelihood function, generally we use small l. So that is log of L theta x. So let me give examples of this here. Let us take a break for 5 minutes and then I will continue here. So we can consider actually in many of the practical problems that it is easier to maximize the log of the likelihood function, because the mathematical manipulation which is required for log function, it may be more complicated. So let me start with some examples here. Say let us consider say x1, x2, xn following say Poisson distribution with parameter lambda. Okay. So what is the distribution you remember in the Poisson case? It is e to the power minus lambda, lambda to the power by x divided by x factorial, where x can take values 0, 1, 2 and so on. So the likelihood function is that is the product of the distributions e to the power minus lambda, lambda to the power xi by xi factorial, where xi's are all 0, 1, 2 and so on. So if you simplify this, it is becoming e to the power minus n lambda, lambda to the power sigma xi divided by product of xi factorial, I is equal to 1 to n. Each of the xi's are 0, 1, 2 and so on. Now if I want to maximize this with respect to lambda, you can see this is little bit complicated function, because it is product of two terms containing lambda. So if you use ordinary methods of calculus, then you need to look at the behavior of the log function of the likelihood function. That means whether it is an increasing function or decreasing function. So individually, of course, e to the power minus n lambda is decreasing and lambda to the power sigma xi is increasing. But what about the product? So if you want to study that, then you need to take derivative of this, and since it is a product of two terms with certain exponents, it will be little complicated. So let us consider then log of this. So the log likelihood is so that is log of L lambda, that is minus n lambda plus sigma xi log of lambda minus log of product xi factorial. Now this has become sort of log linear here, so it is easy to look at the behavior of this. To consider the maximization of L with respect to lambda, we consider the derivative so we consider dl by d lambda. Here x's are fixed because that is the sample here, so we have to maximize with respect to the parameter value here. So that is minus n plus sigma xi by lambda. If you want, you can write it in a slightly modified fashion. You can write it as 1 by lambda x bar minus, so I can take n outside and I can put it like this. Okay, because sigma xi I can write as n x bar, and I take LCM and I can put it like this. So you can see here that it is greater than 0 if lambda is less than x bar, and it is less than 0 if lambda is greater than x bar. So how the behavior of the function L lambda will be there. That means if x bar is a point here, then it is increasing up to x bar and then it is decreasing thereafter. Because for lambda less than x bar, it is positive, so L is increasing, and for lambda greater than x bar, it is negative, so it is a decreasing function. So that means the maximum is attained at lambda is equal to x bar. So L lambda achieves maximum at lambda is equal to x bar. So the maximum likelihood estimator of lambda is x bar here. Okay. Is the working clear to you? Is the working clear?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Let us take another example. Say x1, x2, xn is a random sample from normal mu sigma square. So there are two parameters here, and let us consider the likelihood function. That is the product of the joint distribution of x1, x2, xn. So that is product of 1 by sigma root 2 pi e to the power minus 1 by 2 xi minus mu by sigma square. So that is 1 by sigma to the power n, 2 pi to the power n by 2, or we can write like this also. I can combine these two terms. E to the power minus 1 by 2 sigma square, sigma xi minus mu square. So once again, if we look at maximization of this with respect to mu and sigma square, it is little bit complicated because you have terms in the exponent and then you have terms which are product of that. So let us take the log likelihood here also. So the log likelihood function is minus n by 2 log 2 pi minus n by 2 log of sigma square minus 1 by 2 sigma square sigma xi minus mu square. Now we have to consider the maximization of this with respect to mu as well as the sigma square. So let us consider that. So to consider maximization with respect to mu, I consider the partial derivative of this with respect to mu. So the first two terms do not contribute with respect to mu, therefore they vanish here. So you will get sigma xi minus mu divided by sigma square, because minus 2 will come, that will cancel out. So that is n x bar minus mu by sigma square. So derivative with respect to mu can be analyzed here. So this is positive if mu is less than x bar and less than 0 if mu is greater than x bar. That is L mu sigma square x is increasing with respect to mu if mu is less than x bar and decreasing with respect to mu if mu is greater than x bar for all values of sigma square. So that means with respect to mu, the maximization is at x bar. So the maximum value of L with respect to mu is attained at mu is equal to x bar. So now the likelihood function becomes the log likelihood function L is equal to minus n by 2 log 2 pi minus n by 2 log sigma square minus 1 by 2 sigma square sigma xi minus x bar square, because we can substitute mu is equal to x bar here, and now the job is to maximize with respect to sigma square. So to maximize with respect to sigma square, let us consider the derivative with respect to sigma square, that is minus n by 2 sigma square plus 1 by 2 sigma to the power 4 sigma xi minus x bar whole square. So we can again see this. This can be written as 1 by 2 sigma to the power 4. So this is 1 by n sigma xi minus x bar square minus sigma square. So this is positive if sigma square is less than 1 by n sigma xi minus x bar square, and less than 0 if sigma square is greater than 1 by n sigma xi minus x bar square. So once again you can see it is increasing for sigma square less than 1 by n sigma xi minus x bar square, and thereafter it is decreasing with respect to sigma square. So maximum value with respect to sigma square is attained when sigma square is equal to 1 by n sigma xi minus x bar square. So maximum likelihood estimators of mu and sigma square are mu head is equal to x bar and sigma head square is equal to 1 by n sigma xi minus x bar square. So this is the method of obtaining maximum likelihood estimators for the parameters of a distribution. So is the methodology clear?
Yes, sir.
Is the method clear?
Yes, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So I will not spend any more time on the methods of estimation. So in statistics, actually this is a full-fledged subject actually, the theory of estimation. So I have done only basics here because in 1 hour lecture I cannot do more than this, but it is actually a full 1 semester course in most of the traditional universities where statistics is taught as a full-fledged subject. So anyway, those who are interested, you can read the books. I have given all the references. You can also follow my lectures on statistical inference, which are available on NPTEL through YouTube, etc. So you can follow all of those things. Next, we talk about confidence intervals. So in the point estimation, what is happening is that we are assigning a single value. Okay, so for example, if I say what is the average income of people in India, so you will put some value, say 1,200 rupees per month or something like that. We put some single value. But suppose I say what is the expected rainfall in the next monsoon, so we will say okay, it is approximately say 170 centimeter. But some people, they have a certain objection to this, that whatever value you give, it will not be always correct, because there will be some variation. In place of 1,200 rupees, it can be 1,300 rupees also. So rather than giving a single value, why not give an interval? So you say that it lies between 1,100 rupees to 1,300 rupees. The rainfall will be between 150 centimeter to 200 centimeter. So now this is called interval estimation. Now in the interval estimation, you can consider a large interval or you can consider a small interval. So you can qualify that interval with certain probability. That means, what is the probability that it lies in an interval of length, say 165 centimeter to 175 centimeter. So the smaller the interval, the probability will be less. The larger the interval, the probability will be more. This is called confidence coefficient. Okay, so we now give a formal definition. Let T1x and T2x be two statistics such that probability of T1x less than g theta less than T2x is equal to 1 minus alpha, where alpha is some number between 0 and 1. Then T1x to T2x is called a 101 minus alpha % confidence interval for g theta when the sample x is equal to x is observed. So this confidence means that suppose I take alpha is equal to 0.05, so 1 minus alpha will become 0.95. That means if I do the experiment say 100 times, then 95% of the time it will lie in that region. That is the meaning of the confidence interval. Now, how to derive the confidence interval? So there is a full-fledged theory of derivation of the confidence intervals. I will discuss one simple method of pivoting for confidence intervals. Okay. So let us consider say x1, x2, xn following normal mu sigma square. So the parameters here are mu and sigma square. So we would like to find out the confidence intervals for mu as well as sigma square. So I will consider various cases here. So we want confidence interval for mu when sigma square is known. Okay. So let us consider x bar. Now in the sampling distribution we have derived this. X bar follows normal mu sigma square by n. So this means that if I consider square root n x bar minus mu by sigma, that follows normal 0, 1. Okay, this is your z, that is the standard normal distribution. So we can write down the statement in the standard normal distribution. So this is 0. So minus z alpha by 2 to z alpha by 2. See, in normal distribution, what did we have? The definition z alpha point is such that the probability beyond that is, so if I consider this as alpha by 2, this as alpha by 2, then the probability between this is 1 minus alpha. Okay. So we write here then the statement, we write probability that minus z alpha by 2 less than z alpha by 2, that is equal to 1 minus alpha. Okay. The probability that a standard normal random variable lies between minus z alpha by 2 to plus z alpha by 2, it is equal to 1 minus alpha. So let us simplify this statement. Square root n x bar minus mu by sigma less than z alpha by 2, it is equal to 1 minus alpha. So this statement you can simplify, you multiply by sigma by root n and then reverse the notation here, I mean reverse the symbol. So this becomes x bar minus sigma by root n z alpha by 2 less than mu less than x bar plus sigma by root n z alpha by 2, that is equal to 1 minus alpha. So if you match with this definition, that probability of T1x less than g theta less than T2x is equal to 1 minus alpha, then it is equivalent to that statement. This is your T1x and this is your T2x. So mu lies between T1x to T2x with probability 1 minus alpha. So according to our definition of confidence interval, we are having x bar minus sigma by root n z alpha by 2 to x bar plus sigma by root n z alpha by 2 is a 101 minus alpha % confidence interval for mu when sigma is known. Is this derivation clear? Can you follow this?
Yes, sir.
So let us just take some simple example here. Suppose in a given problem x bar is some value, say x bar is equal to say 50. Okay. Suppose sigma is equal to 4. Suppose I take n is equal to say 16 and alpha is equal to say 0.05. So if I take alpha is equal to 0.05, z alpha by 2, that is z of 0.025, you can see from the tables of the normal distribution that I have already shown you many times, it is 1.96. Okay. So what will be the confidence interval here? X bar minus sigma by root n, that is 4. Okay, here I have taken n is equal to 16, so that is then 1.96 to x bar plus 4 by 4, 1.96. So the confidence interval is, I have taken x bar to be 50, so this is 50 minus 1.96, that is 48.04 to 51.96. So this is 95% confidence interval for mu here. So you can easily obtain this thing. Now I consider another case. Okay. Case 2. we want to find out the confidence interval for mu when sigma square is unknown. So in this case, what we do, because sigma square is unknown, so we cannot make use of this confidence interval, because here sigma is used. So if sigma is unknown, we cannot use it. So what we do, we will consider S there. Let us look at how to calculate this. So we have square root n x bar minus mu by sigma as normal 0 1, and then we have n minus 1 s square by sigma square has chi square n minus 1. So you know that the ratio, that if I consider the standard normal divided by a chi square divided by its degrees of freedom square root of that is a t distribution. So this we have derived. So in place of that, we will make use of this. See, this is your t values, t alpha by 2 n minus 1 minus t alpha by 2 n minus 1. So the values in between this probability will be 1 minus alpha. So we write probability of minus t alpha by 2 n minus 1 less than or equal to t less than or equal to t alpha by 2 n minus 1, that is equal to 1 minus alpha. So minus t alpha by 2 n minus 1 less than or equal to root n x bar minus mu by s less than or equal to t alpha by 2 n minus 1, that is equal to 1 minus alpha. So once again we simplify in the same fashion. So if you simplify in the same fashion, that is, you multiply by s by root n and then you reverse the inequalities and then add x bar, then you will get probability of x bar minus s by root n t alpha by 2 n minus 1 less than or equal to mu less than or equal to x bar plus s by root n t alpha by 2 n minus 1, that is equal to 1 minus alpha. So x bar minus s by root n t alpha by 2 n minus 1, this is 101 minus alpha percent confidence interval for mu when sigma square is unknown. So you have seen here that in place of the population standard deviation, we will use the sample standard deviation. So this is the pivoting method, because here we are able to frame a certain statistic so that it has a known distribution, and then we simplify the inequality and just get a confidence interval here. Is it clear?
Yes, sir.
Can you follow this?
Yes.
Can you follow this?
Yes, sir.
I am audible. Can you hear?
Yes,
Sir, you
sir.
are audible.
Are you not able to hear anything? You are able to hear or not? I think the class got disconnected or something.
Hello? Sir, you are audible.
I don't get any response, so I don't know. So we want to find out a confidence interval for the mean diameter of certain ball bearings. So a random sample of 10 ball bearings has been taken, and that has a sample mean of 0.0506 centimeter, and the sample standard deviation is 0.004 centimeter. So if you want to find out the confidence interval, I will use the T alpha by 2, that is 0.025. Suppose I am taking alpha is equal to 0.05. Okay, because I want a 95% confidence interval. So I will look at the tables of the T distribution 0.0259, that is 2.262. So you can see I have shown you the tables of T distribution, F distribution, etc. They are given in the books of any book of statistics. So we consider then x bar minus s by root n. So x bar is 0.0506 plus minus s by root n, that is 0.004 divided by root 10 into 2.262. So this value then you just calculate. So this gives me the confidence interval as 0.0477 to 0.0535. So this is a 95% confidence interval for mu here. Similarly, we may be interested in the confidence interval for confidence interval for mu for sigma square when mu is known. So in this case we will consider W is equal to sigma xi minus mu square by sigma square. That follows a chi-square distribution on n minus 1 degrees of freedom. So chi-square distribution, as you know, it is a positively skewed distribution. However, we will choose two values here, that is chi square alpha by 2 n minus 1 n, and this side we will choose chi square 1 minus alpha by 2 n. Compared to this t and normal, they are symmetric distribution, but this is not a symmetric distribution. So we write probability of chi square 1 minus alpha by 2 n less than or equal to w less than or equal to chi square alpha by 2 n, that is equal to 1 minus alpha. So this w is here. So if we substitute and simplify, that is probability of chi square 1 minus alpha by 2 n less than or equal to sigma xi minus mu square by sigma square less than or equal to chi square alpha by 2 n, that is equal to 1 minus alpha. So you make it reciprocal and multiply by sigma xi minus mu square. So you will get the interval as sigma xi minus mu square divided by chi square alpha by 2 n less than or equal to sigma square less than or equal to sigma xi minus mu square divided by chi square 1 minus alpha by 2 n, that is 1 minus alpha. So a 101 minus alpha % confidence interval for sigma square when mu is known is sigma xi minus mu square divided by chi square alpha by 2 n to sigma xi minus mu square divided by chi square 1 minus alpha by 2 n. Now if mu is unknown, then we cannot make use of this pivot quantity. So we go for another one. So case 4, let me consider. Confidence interval for sigma square when mu is unknown. So in this case we will make use of v, that is equal to n minus 1 s square by sigma square, that follows chi square distribution on n minus 1 degrees of freedom. So we will make use of this as a pivot quantity. So probability of chi square 1 minus alpha by 2 n minus 1 less than or equal to n minus 1 s square by sigma square less than or equal to chi square alpha by 2 n minus 1, that is equal to 1 minus alpha. So you reciprocate, you reverse the inequalities. So what you will get here? This implies that probability of n minus 1 s square divided by chi square alpha by 2 n minus 1 less than or equal to sigma square less than or equal to n minus 1 s square by chi square 1 minus alpha by 2 n minus 1, that is equal to 1 minus alpha. So n minus 1 s square divided by chi square alpha by 2 n minus 1 to n minus 1 s square divided by chi square 1 minus alpha by 2 n minus 1 is 101 minus alpha % confidence interval for sigma square when mu is unknown. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
So I'll end today's class with this example here. So suppose in a problem n is equal to say 31 and s is equal to 0.83 and we want alpha is equal to say 0.02. So we want a 98% confidence interval. Okay. So 98% confidence interval for sigma square, that will be 30 s square, that is 0.83 square divided by chi square. So what do we need? Chi square alpha by 2, that is 0.01 n minus 130. So this value you see from the tables of the chi square distribution, this is 50.89 and chi square 0.99, that is 1 minus alpha by 2 n minus 1. That again you see from the tables of the chi square distribution, it is 14.95. So this is 50.89 to 30 into 0.83 square divided by 14.95. So this is the confidence interval for this. Anyway, so this can be easily simplified. You can check it. 98% confidence interval for sigma square. So is it okay? This is the method of
Yes, sir.
pivoting for finding out the confidence intervals for parameters of a normal distribution. Now in place of one normal distribution, I may have two normal distribution. I may like to find out the confidence interval for mu1 minus mu2 or sigma 1 square by sigma 2 square, etc. Or say in Poisson distribution for lambda or in a gamma distribution. So similar pivotal quantities can be utilized there. So anyway, we don't have much time here, so I will skip all these things. In tomorrow's class, I will give some basic preliminaries of the concept of testing of hypothesis. Okay, I will end today's class at this point.